Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Get CME for this episode by clicking on the CME link in the show notes. Today, we welcome back Tracey O'Connell. She's a radiologist and a physician coach. Her Kevin MD article is titled, Who Do We Become When We Love Work More Than We Love Ourselves? Tracey, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Well, we're talking offline about how it was almost 2 years ago since you were last on. Now, for those who didn't listen to our first few episodes together, just briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Right. So I'm trained as a radiologist, a musculoskeletal imager, and I still do teleradiology a few hours a day, but I left a toxic private practice situation almost 6 years ago now. And since then have just really done a lot of reflecting upon what worked and what didn't work in that career, and now really work with others to foster sustainable well-being in healthcare, whether they're radiologists or even teenagers, just helping people to create lives that are more sustainable from the inside and how we show up at work.
Now, we last spoke, like I said, about 2 years ago. From a coaching standpoint, have you noticed any trends that has emerged over the last 2 years since we last spoke?
Definitely. Definitely more and more people are seeking coaching and seeking consultation and being much more willing to talk about what's missing. I think thanks to you and your show and the contributors and the articles, your space has really been one of the only, shall we say, psychologically safe spaces to really share what's true on the front lines and in people's personal lives. The great resignation, the great alignment, people figuring out what they will and will not tolerate anymore, learning from each other and recognizing that what used to be in secrecy, and I mean, certainly the pandemic brought out a lot of this, but much of it was already there. It just became more than people could tolerate. And so avenues like your programming have definitely given people the skills and the confidence and safety to go ahead and seek something else and talk about what's really happening for them in their lives.
Now, when you encounter healthcare workers who come to you for coaching services, what is, would you say, the most common reason that propels them to seek you out? Is there normally a singular event? Has it been something that's been built up? What would you say is the most common story that you hear from people who engage you for coaching?
Well, I've really narrowed it down. If in broad categories, the things that people almost always present to coaching for have to do with their self-worth
Mm-hmm.
and setting boundaries, recognizing that there's something that doesn't feel right inside of themselves in how they're showing up every day or how they've been previously getting self-worth that's not working anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then figuring out, wow, what do I do about this? I recognize that something is not okay and I want to do something about it, but I don't know what to do about it and how to speak out comfortably or have the confidence, security, and self-worth to talk about and set what's okay and not okay for me and kind of face the consequences of what that might bring.
And you talk more about that in your Kevin MD article titled, Who Do We Become When We Love Work More Than We Love Ourselves? Now, for those who didn't get a chance to read that article, how did it come together?
Well, I was gardening. This is almost a year ago, and
Yeah.
it was around graduation. And someone sent me an article that was from CNN.com. I have the title here. It was an opinion piece written by Carolyn Chin, and it was entitled, Why Do What You Love is the Worst Graduation Advice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was targeted toward college graduates. And so already is selected for folks who have had the opportunity to go to college. And I read the article or opened the article thinking this is going to be something that says that that's impractical
Mm-hmm.
to do what you love, or that's how can we follow passion when we don't know what our passion is.
Sure.
But it was interesting because the article was talking more about, I thought it's going to be about wages. And certainly I want everyone here on this podcast to know that I understand that most of us work because we need to make an income. So when we're going to be talking about, do we love what we do? That's always a caveat for people. Like, well, no, if I won the lottery, maybe I wouldn't work. Some people say I would work
Sure.
anyway. But I think what was interesting is that in the article, the author ended it with, I certainly don't want you to hate your job. Work is an important source of dignity and meaning for all of us. But to love smart in our work obsessed world, we need to ask ourselves instead, who do we become when we love work too much?
Hmm.
And this got me really thinking because my kids are now 23, 21, and 17. So I had at that time a son who was graduating from college. And now, a year later, I have a daughter who's about to graduate from high school. And that article and my own career experience and my kids being those ages and the roles that we play in helping to guide others to not make the same
Yeah.
mistakes we've made really got me thinking about how much does love play a role in what we choose to do in medicine? You know, are we doctors? Is it altruism or is it egoism?
Hmm.
Are we doing this to make others feel better or because it makes us feel better about ourselves? And then how is that sustainable? Like at what point is doing good for others? At what point we all know about compassion fatigue, we know about imposter syndrome, we know about burnout, and then this but then when people do leave these positions or come and we talk about setting boundaries or leaving their work or pursuing something different, then there's this kind of identity crisis
Hmm.
of who am I if I'm not a doctor?
Sure.
And what am I worth? I've invested so much of myself, not just time, hours, energy, resources, money, but there's social capital, there's identity. And so I guess I really got into thinking about if work defines you, who are you without it? And did you choose medicine because you loved it or because you couldn't love yourself if you didn't?
So when you talk to all these physicians in your coaching, I'm sure there's a spectrum, right? So there are going to be physicians who sees medicine, of course, as a calling, and that's all they're going to do. And then you're going to see physicians certainly on the other side of the spectrum where they see medicine more as a way to make a living. So what kind of conclusions have you come to when you're talking to the spectrum of physicians during your coaching and how they answer the questions that you just brought up?
Well, I think I see a biased group, right? Because the people that actually show up for coaching have already decided that
Mm.
they're willing to take some kind of a step forward.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that, we've all sacrificed what we believe is more important than our well-being to get where we are. And you can do that. You can sacrifice your well-being for a really long time, for decades even. But eventually, something happens. It's either a confrontation with self
Hmm.
or a confrontation with a work partner or a health issue or relationship issue that's falling apart. Like it's just, I think what most people are finding is at least the way that the system is set up now, our brains haven't evolved, our physiology, bodies have not evolved as fast as technology and all the demands on us.
Sure.
And so I think that there's this underlying issue is this self-worth issue, which you can do all the things and juggle all the stuff to feel like you're enough. But at the end of the day, you're still confronted with this, who am I? What am I worth? Who am I if I'm not a doctor? Who am I if I'm not good at everything? And I saw this great meme the other day. That was worry. It said, worry about your character, not about your reputation,
Mm.
because your character is who you are, and your reputation is what others think of you. And I'd never thought about it quite that way before. Character is like these mental or moral qualities that are unique or distinctive to an individual. And then we get into reputation, which is what other people think of us or what's earned or to shape our behavior to evoke a specific action from others and kind of play a role.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because my daughter is into theater. And so I was thinking about what's it, you say this person or that character had these qualities, or you say the role I'm playing in the show, or what character are you playing in the show? So
Hmm.
I get really into words and language. And I was like looking up the difference between character and role.
Yeah.
And then also like authenticity, right? Because if you play a role really well, it looks as if you are the person that you're playing. And so that self-worth is that character, those values, those qualities that underlie who you really are, that I think get skipped, in medical culture. And this is what also I came to the conclusion by raising my kids at this age, is that having a child who's 23 and another child who's 21, I think about myself being 22 when I started medical school. And you think you know everything, right? But
Yeah.
we all know through the retrospectoscope we didn't.
Yeah.
And then I see like their own struggles with self-worth right now and choosing careers or choosing relationships. And I just think about, I feel sad for my younger self because at 22, I was dealing with all those same struggles that
Yeah.
they're dealing with, but they just kind of got put on the back burner for like 30 years,
Yeah.
at least 25 years, while I felt that everything else I was doing was more important
Yeah.
than maybe the things that are my character. And we talk about moral injury here in your programming, and that idea really comes down to, yeah, like what am I doing that's not in my character, right? That I don't believe in, whether it's a procedure that I don't believe is necessary, or whether it's I really value my family, but I'm showing up every day
Sure.
for strangers.
Tell us about the long-term consequences for physicians who subjugate their self-worth, perhaps because of their career. From what you've seen, what are the long-term effects of that?
Well, lots of health consequences, personal health consequences, right? People not going to the doctor
Yeah.
until it's too late. I really do believe in Gabor Mate's research or books, or what he's learned as a physician, as a family doctor, and then as a palliative care doctor. His observations that denying the self, denying compassion for the self, really leads to illness on a cellular level. And that even though we can't say, oh, your cancer was caused by that traumatic event in your life, um, he has said that he has yet to see cancer in someone who doesn't have a history of trauma. And so I think that the trauma of physicianhood, as my friend Melissa Hankins talks about, I, I think takes a really huge toll. And
Mm.
so the way that it usually shows up is people thinking that they're juggling everything just fine,
Yeah. Yeah.
but then they have that Jenga tower that one thing goes and then everything goes. But then there's a huge fear component, because when we're feeling amazing and when we're feeling altruistic or egoistic, everything's going well, that feels sustainable
Sure.
and it feels rewarding and it feels like you're master of the universe. But then what happens when the tower collapses is that we don't have the skills to pick ourselves up again. When
Mm.
we're not the good doctor, or are able to juggle all the things we previously juggled, we feel there's a deficit inside of us, as opposed to the external stressors being too much. But then also this huge fear of, I don't know how to cope with this. Like,
Yeah.
I've never encountered this before.
So how can physicians do that? How can they reclaim their self-worth? What are some tips that you could share with us to do that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to spend time on I mean, it takes as much effort as it did to become a doctor,
Yeah.
really. And it's so weird because you meet young people who sort of have that quality. And a lot of the coaching I do with the LGBTQ community, it's kind of them teaching me, because they've already done this inner work on proving who they like getting comfortable with who they are, no matter what other people think, right? Getting comfortable with their own authenticity and character, regardless of the reputation that they have. And so I like working with that group because it gives me more inspiration to deal with people who have always done the thing,
Hmm.
like paved, like followed the paved path, but ironically end up really lost. And things like I heard this other quote by Joseph Campbell recently, which is that if the path you're on is clear, you're probably on someone else's.
Mm.
And so I feel like there's a real reluctance when people do come to me to deal with the blurry path, because we've always known in medicine what comes next in our training. And, once we're in practice, then it's like, as a radiologist, it was like, how many cases am I going to read? Am I going to be the highest,
Hmm.
RVU achiever? Am
Yeah.
I going to be the chair of the department? Am I going to be medical staff, whatever? And so I think it's kind of almost like the first step is giving permission to people to even question a lot
Sure.
of these very basic things and exploring who they are without they're wearing their doctor name tag. And people cry, they don't know who
Yeah.
they are without that. And once we get just that ability to express that and say, hey, that's nothing to be ashamed of, it's completely understandable. And we talk a lot about the things that we've developed shame around and how to have more compassion for self, and not just in a sitting in lotus sort of way, but a fierce protection, a healthy anger
Sure.
to stand up for ourselves and our one wild and precious life.
And my final question, Tracy, tell us some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Self-worth needs to be cultivated. It needs to be taught. If you're looking for sustainable well-being, you can only do you. And that requires attention, intention, time, permission, and connection, company with others. And I will tell you, everyone who's listening, that you are so not alone. I thought when I had my own struggles with my own self-worth that I was seriously the only person in my workplace or on the planet that felt this way.
Hmm.
And I now know that that's universal. I mean, Taylor Swift's new album is all about her own self-loathing and revenge and what if, what it would have been, and falling in love, falling out of love, recovery. I mean, you don't, it's not, it's human. It's human to have these struggles. And it's really, really liberating to share them and talk about them and value them as you move forward.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
So appreciate your time too, Kevin.